Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, we have a very special guest. He comes to us all the way from Australia, Western Australia, Perth to be exact. His name is Paul Abbott, Abbott. And if you're watching this on X, Rockfin, or Rumble, you'll see the cover to his new book. Full title is Death to Justice, The Shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. And Paul has been a student of the assassination of JFK for 30 years. He's acquired a wide scope of knowledge on the topic. And in 2023, he completed a master index for the remaining files of former New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. In applying the same attention to detail, he provides the most exhaustive and focused body of work ever devoted to the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald, which I think we were just kind of talking here in the pre-show. A much overlooked subject. I was saying there were three very important deaths on that November 22nd weekend: JFK, Oswald, and Tibbet. So we can talk more about that. So, Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks, William. It's great to be with you.
Excellent. So for people who may not have heard your name, are not familiar with the Jim Garrison files, maybe you can talk about your background, the Garrison files, and your research and what led up to the publication of this book. I think it was released on Amazon in October 2024.
Yeah, that's right. It's been out for a few months, and I'm getting some great feedback. But just a bit of a background on me. Like you say, I've been a student of the JFK assassination for 30 years. So since a fairly young age, I really got captured by the prolific documentary, the Men Who Killed Kennedy. That was a fairly seminal documentary released back in the 80s, and I watched it at a young age, and that led me to Oliver Stone's JFK, and really from there just looking to soak up whatever I could on the topic. Even back then, I remember thinking, how could such a horrible crime take place in broad daylight in front of so many people, and it'd still be shrouded in mystery. So really for me, even as an Australian, it's been a captivating topic. And I think for me, I've enjoyed the research of so many other people. But it was when I heard about the Jim Garrison files, or the remaining Jim Garrison files, I should say. I got access to those because I was interested in wanting to find out a little bit more about the summer of 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald, and what connections there were to ultimately what happened in Dallas that November. And it was they're very. I'm not sure if you've checked them out, William, or if any of your listeners have either. But there's a lot of documents in there, a lot of duplications, in some vague kind of order, in very, very broad, organized in very broad folders. So
you said there's like 13,000 pages, right?
That's right, 13,000 pages. So I soon stopped trying to make sense of them all, and I literally just opened up an Excel spreadsheet and just started writing down the names of people that I found on each page. And I like to say that it was kind of like Forrest Gump. I just kept going after that. I just kept running with it to ultimately put together a 40,000 line spreadsheet that contained the names of every person I found in each page. Organized into some more specific context. So David Ferry, links to Clay Shaw, for example. So I put that out as a resource to any researchers, because Jim Garrison remains a fairly controversial subject or topic, a person in different sectors of the research community. And for me, it was a case of putting out everything that we could, and letting people, no matter what their knowledge levels of the JFK assassination were, be the judges by accessing, by being able to have a supported level of access through the folders by using my index. So that was what brought me around to the subject that I'm here to talk to you about today, and ultimately led me to putting together the book about Lee Harvey Oswald's shooting. There was a particular folder, and this was one that was organized fairly neatly in Garrison's folders. It was called the Security of Lee Harvey Oswald's transfer. And in it were pages of the Dallas police, I'll call it investigation in inverted commas. It was very tokenistic. It was very cursory. There wasn't much information to be uncovered by witness statements in too great a depth. But the thing that really struck me was the inconsistencies, not just between different people's observations and statements, but inconsistencies within different statements that police personnel gave. And really, for me, that was the beginning of the thread, pulling on the thread of the case. So what I did in kind of very similar fashion to the Garrison folder project was I opened up a spreadsheet and I just made notes of each witness statement across the Dallas police investigation into Oswald shooting. And from there, I collected FBI statements and could see even more contradictions and omissions. And then, of course, the Warren Commission and statements, and a few years later, what the House Select Committee on Assassinations covered off on the Oswald murder as well. And I was able to uncover some really, what I thought were some very interesting and, I guess largely uncovered narratives about what actually took place at Dallas City Hall. It became very clear to me that it was its own Dealey Plaza, such a large and expansive crime scene in terms of narratives and what people heard and saw. And of course, another case being the Ambassador Hotel kitchen where Robert F. Kennedy was shot. So many different stories, so many different observations. And to me, Dallas to City Hall basement, it really ought to be observed in the same kind of lens. That there was so much to the Oswald shooting that, like I say, has been uncovered. So I basically started laying it all down and in my records, and found some very clear stories that I was able to put a book together around.
Yeah, and it's weird. It is like the RFK shooting. It's almost like Oswald was brought out, kind of like RFK was brought out of the ambassador, meeting room or whatever through this pantry. And then there's a lot of people. This was similar too, because there were so many people on site when Ruby shot Oswald, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think probably one of the biggest things I uncover in my book was just how many members of media personnel were actually in the vicinity of the shooting. I think it's just been taken for granted that what the Dallas police reported initially in their investigation there was about a dozen reporters present, but through again reading testimonies, looking at oral histories, subsequent accounts by reporters, I was able to pinpoint 46 members of the press, not just outside City Hall on Commerce Street or Main Street, but actually in the basement, there to witness Ruby step forward and shooting Oswald. And what was perhaps alarming about that number was that was about the almost to the number. I think we had 46 members of the Dallas police present as well. So a 50-50 ratio of members of the media to Dallas police. To me, that's just unconscionable. And it really speaks volumes to the systemic regard that Dallas police had for the media at the time. Jesse Curry even wrote a memo to all members of Dallas police in pretty early into his tenure as police chief that the members of the media were to be treated as much as possible, as regarded as much as possible in terms of access to police and information. It's like Curry viewed the media as the PR arm of Dallas police, and I think further to that, I think there was the view that if the media reported favorably on Dallas police, there was a quid pro quo kind of arrangement that they would get the access to police stories and whatnot. So I think we saw obviously a very heightened example of that in terms of the access that members of the media were allowed to have across that weekend.
Right.
We've all seen footage of the third floor in particular of City Hall being flooded by men with cameras and microphones, and Oswald being dragged through completely unsecure, vulnerable
Right.
to
And
anyone.
supposedly Ruby on site as well, right? At least
That's right. Yeah. There are. I know I'm very aware of there being photographs of Ruby crouching forward or standing on a table at the back of the press conference that Oswald was speaking at, and it was alleged that Ruby corrected Henry Wade when he mispronounced Fair Play for Cuba committee. I'm not sure about that either, because the audio it's pretty hard to detect a single voice, let alone at Ruby's, that actually corrected Wade. But the point was there were witness statements and even members of the media that testified to seeing Ruby on footage, going into Henry Wade's office and not coming out again. Ruby even helped broker an interview for KLIF radio, around Friday midnight, for an interview with Henry Wade. So he was definitely on site, and whether he was stalking Oswald all the way along and never got the opportunity, until obviously it was made well and truly open for him on Sunday morning. Who knows?
Right. No, it's incredible. I mean, they would never let the media around a big event like that, like they did back in '63. It's incredible. They're just milling about foreign guys from Japan. Like, it's really unbelievable. But they really had Oswald. Somebody didn't want Oswald to live, right? I mean, somebody wanted to make sure that justice would be quelched by his death. Would you agree with that?
100%. I'd argue that this is probably getting into more the JFK assassination side of things, but I'd argue that Oswald potentially wasn't meant to live, beyond the Texas Book Depository. He was obviously able to get away from there alive, and it's still debatable exactly how he did that, with conflicting testimonies in terms of him running down the grass from the book depository and getting into that Rambler station wagon at 12:40, as opposed to very tentative, questionable accounts of him getting on a bus a few blocks further back up Elm Street. So even that is contentious. But absolutely, ultimately, his silencing was meant to keep him quiet. And personally, and I think this is where people have different views, I think it was because he really didn't know. He had been kept in the dark, and if he was allowed to be put in front of any kind of competent lawyer on trial, there would have been very little that he could have testified to, which in itself would have been a danger to those that were ultimately responsible.
Right. It is fascinating because he was never charged, to my knowledge, or provided access to counsel, right, for those 2 days.
Definitely not provided access to counsel. It is very debatable if he was charged. There's obviously the famous press conference footage where a reporter actually tells him, it was Bill Mercer, actually told him, that you have been charged with killing the president, and you can actually see Oswald's. It's a very interesting reaction. He looks. It's like, are you kidding me? Okay, all right, I can see what's happening now. Kind of reaction. You can see a visible change in his face. So I think at that point he hadn't been charged, and it's debatable if later on into just past midnight at that time, if he ever was. I think it was Detective Jim Lavelle. He was the detective in the white cream suit with the large Stetson hat that was on Oswald's right. I think he came out and said something about Oswald not being charged for President Kennedy's shooting as well.
Yeah, no, so it is remarkable. So they're like bringing him around, talking to him. He's been punched somehow. So there is a dispute about whether he walked down and got into that station wagon or somehow got away, but he got away somehow from the depository and went back to his home and then went to the Texas Theater. And that's even sketchy too. Like I've heard stories that they tried to kill him there or a shot went off in the theater, right? Have you heard that?
I have, and I think that would have been the next point where the attempt to fall back at the plan to silence Oswald then. But he was very smart, and I think he was, whether it was in a deliberate or conscious action, but I tend to subscribe to the theory that Oswald may have even been that figure that has been highlighted as prayer man standing on the steps. He was actually watching the motorcade go by, and Bart Camp and other researchers like Stan Dane and Sean Murphy give a very, very good argument for that, just by elimination of who else possibly that figure could be, because book depository employees that were asked never spoke of any unknown strangers being in their presence in that vicinity. So I think there might be something to that even. Therefore, Oswald, kind of nixed the opportunity to be shot as the fleeing assassin, because obviously he was right there on the steps and clearly wasn't five floors above in the 6th floor window shooting down. So I think right there that was when things changed. And yeah, we get to the Texas Theater. Tippett had been shot as a way to lead, throw further suspicion on Oswald, who was conveniently planted at the theater, clearly waiting for someone. And yes, when he was apprehended by police at Texas Theater, he was very quick to say, "I am not resisting arrest. I am not resisting arrest." Further, making it hard to again justify why a person shouting that would subsequently be shot. So I think he had some wits about him, that's for sure.
Yeah, and his whole life, I mean, you kind of go into something I've gone over on other shows about how mysterious his background was, but also he had to have kind of known that he was being able to go to Soviet Union and come back is pretty, he had to have been aware that he was in, and especially at Atsugi, that he was in some kind of security or national security position. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think at most, I think he would have been thought of himself as some kind of informant. He might have cottoned on to some kind of plot that he was allowed to hear of that was in the works for Dallas. Interestingly enough, there was, when we think about the alleged plot in Chicago, the attempt that was in the works up there on November 2nd to kill President Kennedy when he came to town there. Apparently someone contacted I think it was the local FBI office, and used the name, identified themselves as Lee, to blow the whistle on that plot as well. So who knows if that was informant Oswald doing his best to to his bit as the informant that I think he was,
right,
or that he thought he was.
That he thought he was. Like, I mean, it's really something else. So there's like 90 people, media police. There's also a ton of people at the Texas Theater too. I think I saw a picture of like 40 or 50 cops at the Texas Theater. So they're around him all the time. Can you kind of talk and give the background of how he was being transported to somewhere, right? And maybe you can talk about that.
So per Texas statutes at the time, as soon as someone, I'm not sure if that's the case now, but as soon as someone's charged with a crime, they can be taken into the custody of the local sheriff. So we know that Oswald was charged for the shooting of J.D. Tippett on the evening of November 22nd. So theoretically, he actually could have been taken to county jail and obviously been in the safe confines of maximum security there as early as Friday night. But we know that wasn't the case. And there is a fairly logical reason as to why he was kept at City Hall. And that's obviously because they were Captain Fritz, the head of the homicide and robbery division, who was leading the investigation, were still taking witness statements. There were the lineups, which I think, as most researchers know, were clearly stacked against Oswald. So there was still a lot of the initial investigation taking place. So it was logical, and I think Fritz said in his statement to one of his statements to the Warren Commission that rather than carrying out interrogations at the county jail, having to carry files and whatnot, they just kept Oswald there at City Hall. So it comes around to Saturday afternoon, and the sheriff, Dallas Sheriff Bill Decker, heard from someone in one of the reporters that there was talk that Oswald would be transferred that afternoon. And this might have came because Jesse Curry was actually leaning on, Jesse Curry was the Dallas police chief, by the way. He was leaning on Captain Fritz, who was still interrogating and investigating Oswald. When can we transfer Oswald? I'm getting a lot of questions about it. When can he be moved? So initially it was thought the earliest time might be 4 o'clock that afternoon. Fritz said, no, that's too soon. I'm not going to be ready in time. But Curry was still applying the pressure, saying, I need to tell these people, i.e. the media, something. Will he be able to be transferred tomorrow morning, being the Sunday morning? And Fritz said, yes, he will be ready. I don't see any problem with that. I'm paraphrasing. But Curry actually came out, I think it was around 6 o'clock on Saturday evening, and told reporters that Oswald would be transferred at 10 o'clock the following morning. I believe that he was specific about the time that he gave the reporters. And over the years, it's morphed into Curry saying, if you come back to Dallas City Hall by 10 o'clock, you won't have missed anything in terms of Oswald being transferred. But there are testimonies that infer that it was actually 10 o'clock. Seth Cantor is an example, a reporter. He woke up just after 10 o'clock and thought he would have missed the transfer. He was a bit stressed out. But when he got to the jail, of course, the transfer hadn't taken place, because ultimately it got in motion just after 11:15 on that morning. The thing was, the plan up until very much last minute was to transfer Oswald from Dallas City Hall via the basement in an armoured truck, and take the journey of, I think it's about 10 or 11 blocks west to the county jail where it overlooked Dealey Plaza at the time. The thing was, overnight, there were threats that were phoned in against Oswald's life, saying, if he's transferred or when he's transferred, there's a committee of 100 people that have voted that Oswald should be killed. In my book, I question the validity of those threats, because it was only the FBI and the Sheriff's Department that received them. That's a fairly complex little piece of the narrative, but I do question those. But regardless, Curry was word of these threats got to the Dallas police. Captain Fraser received word of them from both the FBI and the sheriff who was on duty that night, and he acted to at least get in contact with Fritz and Curry to find out what to do. Fritz deflected him onto Curry, and Curry's phone was disconnected. He clearly had it off the hook, and didn't want it to be disturbed. So when a couple of police patrol officers were sent around to Curry's house to relay news of the threats, he basically, and it's in his testimony, said, just tell the Sheriff Decker that I will be, and the FBI, that I will be in at 8:30 Sunday morning. We'll deal with this transfer then. So there was a chance, if these threats are real, to have actually moved Oswald in the safety of darkness and quickly. But obviously that didn't take place, and the transfer was kept to schedule. And again, I think that was that could be as simply as Curry wanting to keep his word with the media, what he told them that prior evening. So we get to 11 o'clock, and Fritz argues that an armored truck would be pretty cumbersome. if there was an attack to take place. So the plan changed for Oswald to be brought down, handcuffed, escorted by detectives, and simply put into an unmarked police car, and still have the armored car as part of the convoy, but more as a decoy. So that was the plan.
Right, incredible. And you're right. This is the first live shooting on television. Is that really true?
That's right. Yeah, there have been obviously killings taking place on television. I think a Japanese politician was attacked with a sword, I think, on stage. That was televised, but this was the first shooting on live television, and I think that's probably why, when we talk about this case being largely uncovered, I think it was, and I use the words in my book, it was kind of like a macabre bookend to one hell of a weekend. Obviously, I wasn't alive at the time, but there was a numbing of the senses. 24-hour news cycle, news coverage. This was the first time it took place, where it was just non-stop 24/7 devoted news to the topic. So it's kind of like when Sunday morning arrived, and attention was kind of largely on Washington and the funeral for President Kennedy. I think when Oswald was killed back in Dallas, there was an outcry, of course, but I think people were largely numbed to it, and media swung into action, and obviously the Warren Commission looked into the shooting of Oswald, but it only dug too far, as I also outline in my book.
Interesting. What's their conclusion? The Warren Commission, very suspect conclusions on a lot of subjects.
Yeah, they acknowledge in their report that Jack Ruby more than likely entered the basement by foot from the main street, down the Main Street ramp, and that it was purely out of luck, and it was an act of opportunism, and he was just happened to be there at the right time to carry out this horrible deed. Absolutely. But as I, and not just myself, I must credit some other researchers out there, we well and truly make the case that Ruby did not enter the basement down the Main Street ramp. It has been proven over and over many times that it did not happen that way.
Wow. So, but I mean, did you learn stuff looking at all these different media figures? Like there's people from, I think one of the guys, Jackson, won a Pulitzer Prize, like the shooting that everybody's seen. I mean, what did all of this other media and all the reports and all the people on site indicate to you? What were your conclusions?
Well, it's interesting. Again, I think a lot of the Dallas police came into a little bit of scrutiny in terms of how many members of the media they checked the credentials of, to let into particularly the basement on that Sunday morning. But I think in all fairness, a lot of the media were there at City Hall across that weekend. So a lot of the media were recognized, and when reporters, someone like Stephen Alexander or Ike Pappas, these kind of people say, well, my identity wasn't checked. I think it's fair to assume that, rightly or wrongly, Dallas police personnel recalled them as being legitimate reporters. So I think that's right there. That's fairly logical. But I think for me, what astounded me about the media aspect, not just the amount of reporters that were on the scene, but there were some that filmed, took footage of the scene, but we've never seen that footage. It was never pursued as to what they'd captured. And I refer to someone like, for example, Gene Barnes, who was standing towards the back. If you look at the photo like the Bob Jackson photograph, you'll see a corridor in the rear distance, and that was leading in front of the jail office that Oswald had just been brought out of from the elevator there. Gene Barnes took footage of Oswald emerging from the elevator and there was a delay in bringing him out from the jail office for a few seconds, and we've never had that accounted for, and I've always wanted to know why. But Barnes doesn't let on. He was just able to leave the scene immediately, and only heard the shooting as he was walking out of the basement to get to his car up on street level, because that was his plan, was to film the convoy as it was going to county jail. So we have little stories like that. But the other thing that's alarming for me is the lack of detail that these professional reporters, who it's their very job to observe and report on what they see, gave very little detail. And again, in fairness, Ruby's act of stepping forward and suddenly shooting Oswald, it was a very, we've all seen the footage. It was a very quick thing. It took place in a barely a second. So yes, fair enough. But there is still people that were in prime positions that were never interviewed at all. You mentioned the Japanese reporter. He was standing right where Ruby emerged. No one, to this day, no one has been able to categorically verify that person's identity. He was taking photos as well. You can see that in the front on footage. Peter Worthington was standing right next to Fritz. He was a reporter from Toronto. He was standing right next to Fritz when the shooting happened. He was never brought before any of the official investigations, and we can't even say it was because these people were from another country or another state, because other reporters were called upon by the Dallas police investigation initially. So there was just such an inattention devoted to what the media saw, and the media went along with it.
It's interesting. Maybe because they believed the narrative that Oswald was a bad guy or a commie. So it's like, why pursue it? Like the story at that time may have been more meaningful or something. I don't know, but it did seem weird. Like, this is an incredible event. This is the assassin of like the most, like, this changed history. Like in your intro, you talk about all the things that are affected, like because of this. It's like Vietnam, third world, Middle East, Cuba policy, all that stuff's on the line. And they didn't follow through with all this stuff. It's incredible.
There was just an obedience to the government, I think, and to the authorities. Obviously, President Kennedy, he had the media on his side largely. So that there's another example of that. And I think with Dallas police, they had a reputation back then. They were hard hitting. They had a high hit rate for convictions. You didn't mess with them. And I think that, a lot of people went along with that as well for their own safety.
I guess that probably makes sense. There might have been a little intimidation and stuff like that there. I mean, what's the dispute? There's disputes about his health care, about what Ruby said. What did Ruby really say? And how fast he passed. I mean, it's interesting that 2 days earlier, JFK is taken to Parkland, and then his assassin shows up that direction too, right?
He was wheeled off into another trauma room, just out of respect, obviously, for President Kennedy. But Oswald's, that was the other thing that really, and I think people don't really have really ever considered, was Oswald's mistreatment. Not just whilst he was in custody, but from the very moment he was shot. He was being led to a car, and nobody, in all of the testimonies and statements that I've read, and even seminal books over the years that have devoted little sections within chapters to the Oswald shooting, no one actually came out and questioned, why wasn't Oswald just put into the car he was being led to and rushed straight to hospital? Instead, what happened was, and again, I think we've all seen the footage, there was a swarm of bodies, obviously all over Jack Ruby. I highlight 12 Dallas police officers that were all over Ruby trying to subdue him. And obviously Detective Lavelle was handcuffed to Oswald, so he had no choice, but they were both swarmed all over and swept away back to the jail office. So why Oswald wasn't taken straight into a car and sped away to the nearest hospital, being Parkland, that's never been adequately answered. And the first aid officer that was on the scene, his story was incredibly garbled as well, and he didn't even testify for the Dallas police investigation. The FBI picked it up with him, and it's just, what actually took place in the jail office when Oswald was being looked over and determined with what had happened. It's 3 minutes, three, and it may even be upwards of 4 minutes passed before the ambulance arrived, and Oswald was rolled out on the stretcher, his arm hanging off and dragging along the ground. Was put into it and finally then rushed off, but. I gather his treatment, what took place at Parkland's a little bit more straightforward, but I tell you, it's very hard to get a coherent story of exactly what happened as soon as Oswald was shot. Even there's conflicting testimonies, with Dallas police personnel. The Graves, who was holding Oswald's right arm, testified in a undated, unsigned statement for the Dallas police investigation that Oswald was shot and put straight into a ambulance immediately and taken to hospital. That's not what happened, but these things have just been allowed to be kind of baked into history and have, like I say, largely stayed uncovered.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think you wrote that he had surgery within 10 minutes. Parkland's not that far from the site. I mean, it's maybe 5-10 minutes down the freeway, but it is incredible. I was only one shot too. That's all that Ruby got off to supposedly facilitate his death, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was so. According to the autopsy, Oswald was shot between, I think it was just above the 7th rib, and the bullet lodged just below the skin around the 11th rib on his right side. So. A better, aside from being point blank and in the head, a more effective shot you probably could not have taken in terms of damaging, the maximum amount of organs in his abdomen. So it was a very precise and well executed shot. And there was on the ground where it took place, there was no blood. On the basement corridor ground there was no blood to be seen, and a very faint patch of blood could only be seen in the jail office. So, clearly, if that's the case, it was he bled out. He was obviously bleeding out internally immediately, and it was dire for him. Charles Crenshaw, one of the treating doctors at Parkland, said the only way Oswald could have survived was if he was firstly immediately put into an ambulance and administered Ringer's lactate, which I gather promotes or keeps circulation going, because that's obviously ultimately what killed Oswald was the toxins that had kind of started to build up in his arteries and veins. When circulation, when he was bleeding out internally. So when the doctors at Parkland re-established circulation, the toxins basically overloaded his heart and poisoned him, and I think he went into some cardiac arrest, and that was it.
Wow, remarkable. And you kind of wrote it right in your book. Some people speculate, or maybe you find this true, that he recognized Ruby, or do you think that he just glanced over at him? What's your take?
I think that, and that leads to another point about the car horns. People think that car horns were signals for Captain Fritz and Ruby. To say that Oswald's here, get ready to jump into action. But in terms of Oswald looking to his left, I think that was actually, and if you look at, and it's on my YouTube channel, George Phoenix's footage, I think it's more evident that Oswald was actually looking at Ike Pappas, who had just asked him a question, do you have anything to say? As you can hear in the audio of the shooting. I think it's more likely that Oswald was just looking to who asked, to the direction in which that question came from, which is where Ike Pappas was standing from. Ruby was fairly well hidden behind not just Ike Pappas, but a detective by the name of Blackie Harrison. And if you recall the Bob Jackson photograph, he's the gentleman that's to the right, reaching out, and it's kind of, he's got a hand to his mouth, reaching out after Ruby as he's shooting Oswald. That's a cigar he's putting in his mouth, and I highlight him as a very suspicious character in my book as well. But no, I think it was as innocent as Oswald just looking to his left. Yes, and granted in the general direction of where Ruby was, but I think it was to Ike Pappas, the reporter.
Yeah, there's a lot more in this book. All the detail is amazing, and all the graphs and signs that you use to kind of show everything. And I've never heard of some of those names. Do you have time for a little question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
John's asking, Ferry Ruby and Oswald knew each other and had links to New Orleans before the event. Yes. Do you know about that?
I don't. Probably the only thing I could add to that is that that there was a reference to a David Ferry in the Warren Commission, and this is what a couple of the reporters from, and I think it was actually Gene Barnes, who I referred to earlier, picked up on a lead of this David Ferry, who was some kind of pilot from New Orleans who was at the Carousel Club, and therefore, there's that possible connection to Ruby there. But no, I'm happy to put my hand up to say I don't know of any links to Ferry, Ruby, and Oswald. I certainly didn't pick up on any when I was going through the Garrison folders.
Interesting. Yeah, Ruby's an interesting guy. He's the Carousel Club was downtown too, so he was that was kind of like his environment was downtown Dallas, is my understanding. Yeah, I think the Carousel Club is gone.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and Ruby, he knew a lot of the Dallas police officers. He was the employee of some of the DPD's wives and girlfriends. He was what they called a police groupie, I suppose. And a news junkie. He wanted to be in the center of all the action. So I think if anyone was to be put forward or put up to the task of snuffing Oswald out, I think they had a pretty good mark in Ruby. He was mob linked. He was evidently an FBI informant, going back to gun running for the gun running days for the pre-Cuba Castro Revolution movement. So he was a hell of a figure to kind of be in the center of this thing, and I think largely to a degree with how Oswald was set up. I think it was done by design, but so investigative authorities wouldn't dig too deeply. And that was definitely the case with the Warren Commission. Burt Griffin and Leon Hubert, who were heading up the Ruby part of the investigation, actually, found started some really interesting threads when they were looking into Ruby. Narcotics, prostitution, links to the mob, police, and gun running. And they wanted to devote an entire chapter in the Warren Commission, the final Warren report, to Oswald's killing, but they were very clearly cut off at the pass by that. So they had some leads that they wanted to pursue and thought that were worth pursuing, particularly in the front of Ruby. But again, the Warren Commission only had one job. It was to put it all on Oswald's shoulders. Nothing more to say here.
Right. You mentioned the Rockefeller Commission, Church Committee, HSCA. So these other things also took place after the Warren Commission, but there's a lot of information in this book. I mean, it's so important, this whole death of Lee Harvey Oswald. It's an incredible event that this most important assassination in American history, maybe since Lincoln, if not more important than Lincoln as far as policy changes. Like Lincoln was more of a vengeance kind of killing. The war was over, but this is like at the head of this conflict between anti-war, war, and so many domestic policies, and then this guy gets shot. It's incredible.
It was Kennedy's assassination was a very clear defining, changing point in modern history, and I'm saying that as an Australian. There were impacts all over the world. He wanted to empower third world nations, to be self-sustaining. He arguably, I think the Vietnam War wouldn't have escalated to what it was for as long as it was had he lived, and certainly the case of the Cold War as well. So it is a defining moment in the world, and I think no president ever since has ever tried to act like the statesman that Kennedy clearly was. So it was still, I think, we're feeling the effects of, and will continue to, of President Kennedy's assassination. And it makes the snuffing out, the silencing, the murder and the execution of his alleged assassin even more compelling. And if there's a chance that any more of these documents that are waiting to be uncovered release anything, there might be some more light shed on the FBI's investigation on Oswald's shooting, because they were very prolific, and I've got some questions about what they uncovered as well.
Right. I mean, what else can people find in this book that we didn't cover? I know there's a lot we didn't cover. And then where else can people find the book?
Yeah, so what I really set out to write the kind of book that I wanted to find and read. I looked for so long to find anything that was so devoted to Oswald's shooting, because I think how it's been just largely taken as an open and shut case. I think most researchers, and people that are interested in the case, if they're being honest and really think about it, it just seems fishy. It seemed fishy from the start, and I think that's just what it's been relegated to. Because obviously, what took place in Dealey Plaza and Tippett and everything subsequently is just kind of taken the lead. But so what I did was I wanted to write this book in a particular way that would be accessible and something that people of all knowledge levels would be able to gain from, in terms of giving a bit of context about what took place on November 22nd. And leading in, layer by layer into exactly how the shooting unfolded. So I recount, how it was reported, and how it was accounted for, as how it took place at the time. But I gradually get deeper and deeper into, what the media saw and who was there, and little narratives about members of the DPD that were incredibly suspicious, including evidence of conspiracy. When we think about someone like Lewis Miller, who very, very clearly covers Jack Ruby with a black garment seconds after Ruby has shot Oswald. And to me, right there, that's evidence of conspiracy. How could a Dallas police officer be, ready and know to cover Ruby? So I think that's something that I highlight in this book. And what it all leads to is I do a bit of basically put it into a hypothesis of a scenario of how I think, based on the evidence, the shooting came to happen, right from how Ruby was able to actually access the basement to how he was handled up on the immediately after. There's controversy with that, and like I say, getting into exactly how incredibly horribly Oswald was treated after he was shot. So I really give a before, during, and an incredibly in-depth coverage of the event, and then some conclusions that hopefully will pique people's interest to keep looking. I don't want this to be the only book on Oswald's shooting. I think I've laid the case well and truly that it really ought to be its own subject, worthy of research and sensible scrutiny. So yes, in terms of finding the book, thanks, William. You can my website has all the links to online sellers, deathtojustice.com. So you got it on the screen. Thank you. And I'm continuing to put work out on the case. I'm very grateful as well to Paul Blow. He's a leading researcher. He provided me with an awesome foreword for the book, which I'm very grateful for. But I'm continue to put out content on my Substack and YouTube, because I'm making the case that my book is, hopefully, it's just the starting point.
Excellent. So people, if they're interested, they can get this book. I think there's a Kindle and a paperback, correct?
Yeah. So the Kindle, I'll be honest, I'm not sure where exactly that is at the moment. When I last had a look, you could still buy the Kindle, but it's largely available in paperback. And I'm toying with the idea of doing an audiobook, but because I have so many graphs and tables and things in there, it's not probably such an easily immediate kind of audio type book. But we'll
On the
see.
US version of Amazon, there's a Kindle available, so people can get this.
Okay, awesome.
As a Kindle as well. And if they have any questions to you, they can find you. You have a contact
Yeah,
talks along the way.
absolutely. Yep. No, I'm getting some fantastic feedback from the book and some really good questions as well. So please, if anyone has any interest or anything to share, please feel free. It'd be great to hear from you.
Excellent. So thanks so much, Paul. Thanks for your time. Congrats on the book. The full title of the book, again, is Death to Justice, The Shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. The author, again, is Paul Abbott, and it was published October 2024. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, William.
All right, stay there. Stay there.